So, hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Reality and You Foundation. Today we have with us Robert Weiss. He's a therapist from the US who specializes in sexual addiction, porn addiction, infidelity. Doctor, can you give us a little more on, your expertise?
And Shrradha, thank you for having me. And I don't know if you mentioned I'm here in the States,
Yeah,
so we are on different time zones.
yeah,
But nonetheless, my doctorate is in human sexuality. So my background is the discussion of every area of sexuality and understanding. But my expertise and focus is in addiction. I have been running and managing treatment programs, which I don't think you have a lot of India. We do in America for compulsive sexual behaviors like sex, like gambling, like video gaming. And I've written, I think, 9 books. I have a lot of international exposure through the media. So I would say that I am a high level, educated doctor in this particular area. And I
right.
think that's why you reached out to me.
Yeah. I'm so glad and I'm so grateful that you accepted to do this talk with us. So, Doctor, I just want to start off by some basic information, right? We are hearing and seeing a lot of, men specifically coming up, repeatedly coming up with porn addiction. So, I'm not
Mhm.
sure what terminology you're going to use, but, can you give us, just basic information for the viewers as to what is healthy and unhealthy?
I'm really glad you asked the question healthy or unhealthy because I really don't I prefer that to normal because everyone has a different normal for themselves.
Yep.
But I think with any addiction, whether it's, well, first let me back up. I think it's difficult for people to understand behavioral addictions. They understand drugs, they understand alcohol, they understand when you put something into your body that you can have an addiction to that. But the idea that you could be addicted to a behavior,
Right.
gambling, sex, it's or pornography is more difficult for people to understand. However, the concept is the same, meaning if you are involved in a behavior or drug use or alcohol that inhibits your ability to function, you're not doing well in school, you're not doing well with your family, you're creating problems, you violated a relationship vow, that's a problem. If you're not an addict, you say, well, I'm going to stop that because that's a problem for me. Addicts don't have control over their behavior. So they will say, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to do this. This is causing problems, but they don't have control over it. So the failure to be able to meet commitments to myself and others, um, the obvious fact that this is causing negative consequences.
Right.
So number one, I can't stop. Number two, I'm having marital problems. I'm having work problems. I'm having relationship problems. And I've been found out or it's been a problem and I continue to do it. Um, also, so it takes over most of the parts of my life that are important. It becomes out of control. And it really becomes the dominant thing that I want to focus my life around is the ability to disappear into the behavior. So it becomes the primary focus. I fit everything around that, if you will, rather than around my wife or around my children or around my work.
So, Dr. Robert, I just want to know, how does one identify symptoms of this behavior? Like you said, with substance abuse, we know we are consuming the substance. In terms of sex and pornography, what are the symptoms that one can identify that, this is a pattern of behavior that they are coping with?
Well, I think there are a number of obvious ones and some that are less obvious. So the escalation of time and focus. So I might have been looking for an hour, then I'm looking for 2 hours, then I'm looking half a day. Um, Using pornography in inappropriate situations. So at work, for example, I might pull out my phone and go in the restroom, or I might do it in places that are problematic, or perhaps my wife or spouse is waiting for me to spend time with them, and I'm more focused on the sexuality and the porn. So giving up other priorities in order to focus on this, engaging in the porn, pardon me, the porn use in places and situations that are inappropriate or that would be harmful to me and my family. Um, Viewing it, perhaps at times I might be intimate with a spouse, So I've heard that relational and sexual intimacy is diminished because literally I have heard a man say, I was with my wife in bed chatting. Um, we talked about lovemaking, but she went to sleep and I went out into another room and started using porn. So it's almost the avoidance
Yep.
of the intimacy and the connection in order to focus on the pornography. I do want to say something that is very important to me about this. There's a difference between porn. Porn serves two purposes other than the excitement. It's exploratory and it's excitatory.
Right.
So it's very exciting to me. I like the images. It gets me aroused. That's not problematic or unusual unless you are addicted. But exploratory is, oh, I saw this image I didn't realize I liked, or wow, there's a form of sexuality I didn't know I was interested in. And people will often blame the porn. It's because the porn exposed me to that
Right.
now I am interested in it. And I want to say that's not true. I can look at 100 tomatoes online, but if I don't like tomatoes, it doesn't matter how many tomatoes I look at. But if there's a part of me that says, oh, I never knew this, but I really like tomatoes, it's exposed you to it. But looking at it regularly is not going to make you interested in it. And I think people think, well, the porn made me do it. It's because of the porn that now I'm interested in this, or now I'm interested in men, or whatever that is. The porn exposed you to it. It showed you it, but you're going toward whatever it is that you may not like is within you. And I just want to explain that because people say, oh, I never would have been interested in this except for the porn. And that's not true. You may have never been interested in it, but because you weren't never exposed to it before. So I just wanted to clarify.
So what you said is very important because you're saying we have a choice, and it's a very conscious choice sometimes, and most often that the person is making to, go along with the addiction.
Yeah, so let me explain addiction. Addiction is not who who I am sexual with. That may be a problem. That may be wrong. I may be sexual with someone who works for me. But the fact that I have sex in an inappropriate person does not mean that I am a sex addict. I may engage in sexual behavior that I don't like. For example, I'm married and I have children, but I've been having sex with men. And I hate myself for being interested for that part. And I say, well, I must be a sex addict because of what I do, or I must be a sex addict because of who I have sex with. And the addiction is not defined by who or what. The addiction is defined by how it affects the functionality of my life, about my ability to have control over it, about the consequences that it causes, about repetitively turning to it, even though I know it will cause problems. So I may have sex with someone I should not be having sex with. I may be having sex in a way that I don't feel good about. But that is not addiction. Addiction is about compulsivity and the inability and it drawing you further and further away from health.
So I just want to stop here and take a second where, so are we talking about, like you said, you may be married with your kids, and you're still engaging in compulsive sexual behavior. So in effect, are we saying that this is like a person has a parallel life going on?
It's interesting that you said that, and it's a great question because it is what we can call compartmentalized.
Yeah.
So, and the two do not meet. So I have a life over here, let's say, where I'm married and I have children and I have family and my religious beliefs, whatever that is. And then over here, I see sex workers and I have affairs, and or in your case, I am compulsively looking at pornography over and over again. But no one in my personal world would know anything about that behavior. And I would work very hard to keep it a secret because I don't want to stop. And so if my family, let's say, or my spiritual leaders found out that I was doing this, might say, no, this is not good. You have to stop. And just like a drug addict, I don't want to stop.
Right.
So I use the behavior over here, but I never let the people in my life know about it. So essentially, you're right. I'm living two different parallel lives, and neither one of them come together.
And do you often find clients and patients sort of justifying this, because I've seen in my practice that people, want to justify that, oh, I don't have an adequate sexual life with my wife, or, the sex isn't good enough, or, we are traveling and we exposed to these things. So sort of justifying the sexual experience.
Well, I say to men, if you're upset with your spouse, if you're not being sexual at all, or very often, if they've gained weight or they're no longer attractive to you, you can go for a walk. You can buy a car. You can start horse riding. In other words, you can get a divorce. There are many, many options to an unhappy sexual and romantic relationship other than, okay, I am now entitled to look at hours and hours and hours of porn because my spouse is not making me happy. The person who returns to the porn over and over and over again when they're not happy in their relationship, to your point, they blame the relationship. They feel entitled. It's a very important word, entitled. I deserve to be able to look at all that porn because I have an unhappy job, or because my wife or spouse doesn't satisfy me, or because they've gained weight, or because I'm working all the time and I'm tired. There's always an excuse. But again, I want to say, for any addiction, I deserve to drink because I've been working such long days. Who wouldn't drink if they were married to someone like that? So it's really the same form of denial, distortion, justification. And part of treatment is showing someone how much they have distorted reality. May I give you an example?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
So, very simply, if I said my primary goal in my life is to love my family, to love my children, they're the most important thing to me in the world. But at the same time, in my parallel life, I'm spending 3 hours a day looking at porn. I'm communicating with people online through porn. I'm using up my time and my energy that I might spend with my family and children looking at porn. Then the fact that I say my family is the most important thing to me is a lie. And that kind of lie is what we confront in treatment. If you say, and I believe you, that in your heart, your family is the most important thing, then why are you spending all of this time looking at porn? Why are you spending all this time drinking? Why are you spending all this time gambling? And confronting the reality that while I say to myself and others, this is what's important to me, education, work, family, and yet I'm spending so much time and focus on this, that it's very obvious to anyone that even though I say that's my priority, it really isn't. That is the kind of denial, as you put it, or distortions that I have to confront, because the person really is more attracted to the porn. They really do want to spend more time with the porn. And in those moments, they don't care about their family at all.
And I just want to take some time here to distinguish a few concepts. So when we're looking at, a sex addict or a compulsive behavior, we're looking at multiple sexual partners. So other than having your wife or your husband, you're engaging in sex outside. How would that be differentiate from somebody who's polygamous? I mean, we're hearing about these concepts of monogamy and polygamous. So when we're talking about this, how would you define the two?
Lying. That is the key. Trust, the breaking of trust. And in fact, since we're speaking of that a little bit separately, that is what destroys relationships. And Shraddha, you know this, that trust is the foundation of any relationship. That I know that in the world, because we're married, that you always have my well-being in mind. You're always thinking of me as special, important. You're thinking of the commitments you made to me. But trust is destroyed when you find out that I'm doing all these sexual things that you did not know about. So if a couple, for example, was committed to polyamory and that's how they wanted to live their lives, not my problem. Go ahead and enjoy yourselves. But if one partner in a partnership is out doing something sexually because they feel like they want to, and they choose to not tell their spouse, that is very suspect to me. I have young men, I have to say this, who say, oh, I'm polyamorous. But what they really mean is I have as much sex with as many women as I can, and I lie about it to my girlfriend. So the definition of polyamory is very narrow, and it's about living your way in a particular life that is aligned with what you believe and who you are. Porn and sex addiction is out of alignment, and it involves lying and cheating and most of all the breaking of trust.
So,
Does
so
that answer your question? Or maybe there was another
yeah.
part of it, I think.
No, no, I think that's fine. I'm just going to continue with, a little bit more here, but a lot of the cultural, at least in India, there is so much stigma discussing about sex in the marriage. There are very few conversations, and which is why we've initiated this one, on discussing sex and intimacy and
Yes,
desires and urges with your partner. Having said that, I also see a lot of men justifying that men have a sexual desire which is higher than women, and
right.
as you mentioned, the denial and the distortion is so high, that often the reflections are not very prominent in therapy.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I do hear that marital issues related to sex are not often spoken about in India. And I
Yeah.
would say, even here, we're a more open culture, I think, in terms of talking about sex, but couples are still very shy and uncomfortable. And many times they've never talked about it. But I have never met a woman yet who is afraid to talk about cheating. I have never met a woman yet who says, I don't think this is right, or we did not agree with this. So it is the pain and the anger and the disappointment that brings the discussion. I don't understand. This is what almost every spouse says. I don't understand how you could love me and do this
Right.
also. So they're not really talking. And I'll say to you, compulsive porn use and sexual addiction are not about sex. They're about being broken. They're about desperation. They're about someone being unable to manage and contain and tolerate their own feelings. And so they run out to calm or soothe those feelings by drinking, by gambling, by using sex. So the particular articulation, how it plays out, sex, food, eating, gambling, uh, drinking, using, that is important in terms of that particular person and what treatment they need and how it has affected their lives. But the endpoint is a symptom. Addiction is a symptom of underlying emotional issues. I do want to say that you can work on those underlying emotional issues forever and never stop the behavior. Because treatment, and I want to be very clear about this, treatment is about stopping the behavior. Because it doesn't matter what happened in my childhood or what's going on in my marriage. If I don't stop the behavior, things are going to continue to get worse.
But like I was mentioning before, and I totally agree with you, but I was mentioning before that, many cultures, it is sort of normalized that, porn is something that men watch, and, so the entire industry exists. And, as we've seen through COVID and post-COVID, through the usage of social media, internet, websites being
I
freely
see.
available, this addiction is getting worse. I mean, I'm not saying in the married people, but also in the youth, starting from adolescence. So, what percentage of porn addiction are we seeing today in the world? And, how does, even an adolescent sort of understand that this is tipping towards an addiction and this is not part of the healthy phase?
I understand and I apologize for not addressing cultural issues. And I do understand there are cultures where there's more permission for a man
Yeah.
to engage in particular behaviors um, that are considered normative. If a man wants to look at porn, that's normal. Men look at porn. If a man wants to, and I'm not sure if this is true, take on a mistress, is that
Yeah.
acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay. So in all cases, my belief is, how does it affect your life? So it doesn't really matter whether I'm married or not. That is the primary issue people come to treatment in my world, is a spouse is so angry, so frustrated, so upset that they just say, this is wrong. I don't care how much a man has permission to do this. He shouldn't be doing it 5 hours a day, 4 days a week, and not attending our family events or not being involved. So it is not count. It is appropriate and useful in every culture when it becomes an addiction, because there's a difference between enjoying something or having cultural permission and destroying your life doing it. So even if your wife or husband agrees, it's going to affect work. It's going to affect your parenting. It's going to affect every area of your life because, and I want to say this to you, I don't know how busy your day is, but if I had to add 2 or 3 hours a day to look at pornography or to sweep the floor for 2 or 3 hours a day, I guarantee you that every other part of my life would suffer because I was spending this much time in this behavior and I was so dedicated to it. So it is a universal harm. It's not simply to the wife or the spouse, but that is where I most frequently hear the anger, the mistrust, and the upset. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that that's a fabulous answer. So I'm just going to go down to the factors. So, Doctor, as you've studied and numerous books, and you've got a very, very popular podcast. So, are there any biological, psychological factors? Like you said, there's hurt, there's pain, there's a broken person behind there. Are there any biological factors that we can identify with such people?
Well, there actually are the beginnings of now identifying in DNA sequencing where alcoholism lies. So we can now, forever, we have said alcoholics are not moral. They have ethical issues. They're not strong, and now we're seeing that there are actually markers for substance addiction. And I am pretty certain we're going to find markers for depression, anxiety, and ultimately other compulsive behaviors because it is a genetic vulnerability. Addiction runs in families. You will often see my father was an addict, my sister was an addict, or at least my father was depressed, my aunt drank. And so you will see some biological line through a family. But there's another piece: nature, nurture. So if someone with that kind of biological predisposition grew up in a very nurturing, supportive, healthy family and environment, perhaps they're less likely to move naturally toward that behavior. But if they grow up in the nature part in a very chaotic, very problematic family with mental illness and alcoholism, then it's much more likely that the stress of that will push them into beginning the behavior and engaging the behavior because they're programmed for it. They have 50% potential. It really is 50 nature and 50 nurture. It really does run like that.
And do you think that, with the usage of the internet, the social media especially, so I'm just going to take a case, of somebody who's already watching porn, maybe an addict, maybe not high levels of an addiction, but may have certain porn addiction. Today, when you go through their feed on Instagram or Facebook, you would see more pages of or more reels on porn or more images of women. So do you think the internet is further, propagating these, you know, worsening our addictions as such?
Well, we use three A's in the internet addictions. We use the word access. So if you consider pornography as it would have been 25 years ago, I would have had to go somewhere to buy it. I would have had to gone. So I can't simply press a button and there it is in my office. So access is a very important piece. Anonymity, that I used to have to go somewhere or buy something in order to engage in porn use. That left me the possibility that someone would see me, that maybe a neighbor would see me in that shop, or maybe so now I can be completely in my mind anonymous because I'm sitting in my room, there's no one there. So access, anonymity, and then affordability, because porn in my day was expensive. Magazines were expensive, films were expensive. Now it's all free. So if you put those three pieces together, the access that we have, the affordability that we have, and the anonymity that we have, then you have the potential for a much more problematic addictive behavior. And I wanted to answer your other question too. Many people drink. Many use alcohol. Many people go to the casino and they gamble, but they're not necessarily addicts. So simply because you do a behavior that is pleasurable and you enjoy, that does spark excitement and, in my world, dopamine and brain chemicals,
Right.
that doesn't mean you're going to be addicted. Otherwise, we would all be addicted. There is a certain percentage of the population that has genetic vulnerability and has also had early childhood challenges that leave them very, very vulnerable to having a problem with the very same behavior that the rest of us do not. And this is the problem, because if you're not an alcoholic, if you're not a porn addict, you can pick it up and put it down at will. I'll have a drink, not seven. I'll look at a little bit porn, but not for 4 hours. However, if you are an addict, you do the exact same behavior, but you can't stop. You are doing it to disappear, to escape, and therefore, while you and I may look the same, my reasoning is very different. This is why a healthy person would look at me and say, what's wrong with them? I can stop. I don't look at porn for 5 hours a day. Why do they? And the point is that we're not all the same. And I have vulnerabilities that you do not have. Why do I have diabetes and you don't? Because my body is vulnerable to that and yours is not.
So, many people look at smoking, nicotine, drugs, alcohol, like you said, porn being one of the behaviors which is not externally viewed, like you said, it's in your mind. You're doing it on your phone or through your computer, which is only between you and the computer. Nobody's aware about it. So how does one then start modulating if they do realize that they are slipping into an addiction?
Well, unfortunately, there is no modulation. There is an idea of something called harm reduction, where you might reduce the amount of drinking or you might reduce the amount of porn. My experience is, and I think the research says that that doesn't work, because I may say I'm only going to look at it 2 hours a day this week, and then I'm going to go into 1 hour a day. And then the truth is that once I am looking at it, this is a symptom of addiction. Once I am looking at it, I don't have control. I can't say I will, because all of a sudden 3 hours have gone by. I intended one, but then 3 hours went by. And so it is my inability to control it or manage it or stop it that leave me in that situation. But I did want to say something about neurochemistry. And I wondered if you had a question about that, because I think that's extremely important. Did you have a thought that you might want to mention about that? Or would you like me simply to talk about it?
No, I would like you to talk about it.
Well, thank you. You got yourself out of that question. Okay, so we all have things that bring us pleasure. Some of them are substances. I have a glass of wine, that's pleasurable. I have a piece of delicious food, that's pleasurable. Why do I enjoy sex? Why do I enjoy eating? Because if I didn't have sex, there would be no people. If I didn't eat, I wouldn't survive. Why? What draws me to be sexual and to enjoy food? They're pleasurable. Why are they pleasurable? Because the race would not survive unless we liked eating and we liked sex. For some people, those very naturally occurring pleasures have become a way to feel good about themselves, to feel validated, to feel important, to disappear. And so therefore, how do I say this? There are experiences that are not typically pleasurable to the degree that sex might be. When you have a highly pleasurable behavior or substance, there is the potential for addiction, because I want to return to that pleasure over and over and over again. You see very few people addicted to carving wood. You see very few people addicted to gardening. They may love their gardening, they may do it a little bit too much. But if you said, could you not garden this week because we need to clean the garage? I'd be disappointed, but I would go clean the garage. But if I was looking at porn in an addictive way, or if I was having compulsive sexual behavior and you said, could you please not do that? We have to clean the garage. I would say, I'm too busy. I don't have time. I'd like to help you. But the pleasure that the porn brings me has a secondary purpose. I don't I'm not compulsively sexual just to enjoy sex. I don't eat just to enjoy eating. I don't have a glass of wine just to relax. I do it to escape. There is a secondary emotional gain in my engaging in the using of sex or the using of drugs and alcohol. By the way, you mentioned nicotine. The most
Addictive.
the most pleasure your brain can bring you is crystal meth, is methamphetamine. through a substance. The second most exciting and intense and brain rewarding addictive activity is nicotine. This is one of the most addictive substances. Why are these? Why are these? Well, the meth makes you feel excited and great about yourselves and wonderful, and I can do everything. And the nicotine is calming and relaxing, and I feel so. These drugs provide a function that an addict uses in order to cope. Does that help?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be as
So,
succinct as I can be.
so when you're talking about porn addiction or a sexual behavior, are you also saying that while it becomes a coping strategy to deal with stress and anxiety, it is also serving a purpose of feeling calm?
Well, cigarettes make many people so with certain chemicals are so biologically addictive that it doesn't matter what our childhood was like. It doesn't matter how our DNA functions for the most part. Everyone who smokes on a regular basis is going to become addicted. Everyone who takes heroin on a regular basis is going to become addicted. But not everyone who has a glass of wine is going to become an alcoholic. Not everyone who goes to the casino once or twice a year is going to become a compulsive gambler. So what we look at is the intense pleasure and the neurochemistry, the brain chemistry that is released by those activities that make me feel excited and eager. And yes, relaxing for some people, especially with the porn, I can disappear.
Mm.
I'm in a dark room by myself for hours. I don't have to deal with family or friends or pressure or stress, or I can completely put my focus on that. And in that sense, it is alleviating, perhaps is a better word, of the stresses and the anxieties in my world.
I also have another question because I've come across a lot of clients. So, we've also seen an upsurge of sexual disorders, both among men and women. I feel in this decade, a lot of men, especially in India, have come forth talking about erectile dysfunction, premature
Yes.
ejaculation. Do you sort of correlate these to porn viewing or porn addiction? Do you feel that because of their primary sexual disorders, are they predisposed then to use porn as a coping mechanism?
Can
Yeah.
you repeat the question? I'm so
Yeah.
sorry, and I want
So
to answer it.
my question is, men who have,
Oh, right,
erectile dysfunction,
right,
would they then go on to viewing
right,
more of the porn content? Would they then be more
right.
explorative in terms of their sexual behavior?
I actually think it's the opposite. So in other words, I work with men who from a from their adolescence to young adulthood, they were very regularly looking at porn. They didn't date. They didn't learn how to engage socially and relationally and intimately. So now they're 24 and all they know is the porn. And porn, by the way, is what we call a super stimulus. It is so exciting, so arousing on a regular basis, new images all the time, excitement of various areas that then when you go to date someone, well, they're just a person. They're one person. You can only have so much excitement. So what the person becomes aroused by is the constant view of it, of images, the constant excitement at this level. So when they begin to date or engage, they don't get aroused, or a husband might lose erections because that particular intimate relationship experience does not provide as much excitement or interest as the porn does. So over time, I may be less and less able to enjoy my sexual life with people because of the intensity of this.
Yeah, but
May I mention about a super stimulus? Perhaps that would be useful,
yeah,
or is that not
yeah,
useful?
yeah. Go ahead.
I mentioned the word super stimulus. Super stimulus is something that does not exist in nature. For example, I may have been a cave person and I drew pictures of naked people on the wall of the cave. That's not the same as looking at pornography over and over and over again. There is no experience in nature that would cause that degree of excitement. Our bodies are not really set up for that. Um, Drinking alcohol, it was only reasonably recently that people drank the the degree of alcohol. Our alcohol is 50% alcohol, 40% alcohol. Well, for centuries, people drank wine. They drank beer. They drank something with 9%. So it is not naturally occurring to have that level of alcohol. That is a super stimulus. These are things that man has created. Cocaine. There were many people who chewed on cocoa leaves in order to have the energy, like we drink coffee, to do whatever it is they were supposed to do, hunt, let's say. But when we put it in a powdered form, and we made it very intense. Well, now you have a super stimulus. Something that is used is natural, but the degree of the intensity of it is far beyond what would naturally occur. So something that perhaps I might be able to enjoy and not become addicted in, were it a naturally occurring stimulus, when it becomes a super stimulus, it is much more difficult for me to avoid.
So my question earlier was, on men feeling inadequate in themselves. So when like you said, it starts at an early age, maybe 13 or 15. So do we also see men, who are having low confidence, or who've not had great relationships with the opposite sex? Do they tend to get into pornography more often?
I think when one is, it's interesting when you take it out of the porn and you say, is a man who is shy or is challenged by relationships, or might he spend more time in school? Might he spend more time playing sports? In other words, might he avoid the challenge of those social relationships and engage in things that are more comfortable for him and distracting? That may be the case. He may come to maturity later. He may need to find the right person who will help bring him out as in some way. But those who turn to porn as a means of soothing and are turning away from personal relationships, the porn is not exercise. The porn is not spending time with friends. It has its own, it's a super stimulus. So it is very easy for that to become the place that you go for comfort, the place you go to feel connected, the place you go to feel aroused. There was some research in Japan about, it was fairly large research because they have a declining population. And there was a question that the science community was asking in Japan, which is, why were young men being less sexual? What was that about? And they discovered that there was a percentage, about 15% of the young men, who said, I have so much fun with my friends gaming and looking at games and hanging out, and or by myself looking at porn. Why would I want to go be sexual? Why would I want to go through the problem and the challenge of asking someone out and seeing if we get along? And by the way, they said they smell funny because the whole concept of being with another human being is not as exciting, not as interesting, and actually feels like a chore. And I want to add one more thing if I can.
Yeah.
When I was younger, if I wanted to meet someone for sex, let's say it's just for sex, I would have to go somewhere, a party, a bar. I would have to get to know them. I would have to introduce them. Probably I didn't have sex the first time. We'd have to go to dinner. We'd spend time together. Did they like me? Did I like them? Did they feel safe? So there's a whole ritual
Right.
that precedes the ability to be sexual and close to someone. There's no ritual. There's no challenges important. I don't have to push aside my shyness. I don't have to be hopeful that this person might want to be close to me. I don't have to risk rejection because I can completely lose myself in this and get many of my emotional and sexual needs met. That's good enough. And therefore, I don't gravitate. Let me say this, many women will not like this. But one of the reasons I told you I thought you were wonderful and I cared about you and you were so important to me when I was 16 is because I wanted to have sex with you. And I learned how to be charming and warm and how to engage you and have you interested in me. Maybe it started with sex, but as I aged, it became more about connection and relationship. And I've never had those experiences if I'm looking at porn all the time and gaming. I have no idea how to engage. So we're speaking about the younger men. The loss of erection is simple. When I'm looking at all these intense images, I'm just with one person. That's just not as exciting. And it takes a long time away from the porn in order to be able to begin to engage in healthy, intimate behavior. Um, yeah, but I do want to say, and I really need to say this, that everyone who uses excessive amounts of porn, everyone who struggles with erectile dysfunction or relationships and defaults to the porn, they're not necessarily an addict. They may be someone who is shy. They may be someone who struggles with social relationships. There may be all kinds of reasons why they lose themselves in the porn other than addiction.
So I just want to stop here and say that porn addiction is real, right? And while we are all entangled, or while some men are entangled, and of course women as well, I think our entire conversation more is on male sexuality today, although because that's the the predisposed position clients that I see today in India. We see men coming out and talking about these issues more than women, of course. So what are the preventive measures that a society can take in terms of educational programs? Do we have support systems? Of course, on
Yes,
your website, I've seen the 12-step program, support groups that you have out there. Uh, you know, is it something that we need to go back to schooling, give education, have monitoring programs on the internet?
sure. Well, two things. I want to say something about men because you keep saying men and then you say, and also women. The reason men are so engaged in that kind of more focused sexuality is because we are men. We have testosterone.
Yeah.
Men are driven by two things sexually. Number one, novelty. We like to see new things, new images, and we are much more visual than women. So women tend to be more relational in growing their sexuality. Men have a part of them can be relational, but tend to be more visual. So when you take a medium that is both constantly stimulating and also provides a consistent stream of visual images, a man is going to struggle more with that because it meets all of what a part of us is aroused by. A woman will look at that and say, I don't really care that much about body parts. But if you put into that story romance, connection, if you turn that into a love story, or then a woman will be very glad to look at the arousing images because it's fit into a relational context. I did want to speak to prevention. You asked me about that. I don't think it's as difficult as one might think. If you have a culture that wants to eliminate porn, that involves legal, cultural, business decisions that are way above me. I don't make those decisions. But I will say this in America, if I want to drink, I have to be of a certain age, and I cannot go into a bar unless I'm of that age. And if I go to a store to buy a bottle of alcohol, it clearly says you must be this age in order to engage in it. And the person selling it, if they sell it to me underage. So there are prohibitions. If you gamble online, if I go to a casino, they won't let me in unless I'm a certain age. And every wall in every casino says if you have a problem with gambling, the problem in my mind, the simple problem related to this is if there was just a little note on every porn site that said, some people have the potential for addiction. And if you show these symptoms, please click here. And then you were then brought to an arena or an avenue where you could get support or help. Simply saying for some people this may be a problem would be a huge transition from simply normalizing and saying it's fine for everyone. So just putting in a little identification to me would be a start. The porn companies are not interested in doing this at all.
Actually,
So
that's a great tip, because in India, with nicotine or tobacco, any viewing of tobacco on television, in movies, we do have a caution out there that tobacco is,
yes,
yeah, and I think that that's a very healthy thing to put on porn websites as well.
it says when I watch a movie on television on the cable, this will contain sexuality, smoking, and violence. Well, that tells me an awful lot about what I'm looking at, what age. So anyway, I agree with you completely. I do want to talk a little about resources. I wondered if you were going to
Yeah,
ask about
yeah.
those before we stopped.
I asked you about any support systems online where people can reach out, because I feel a lot of people may be ashamed to come forth with their concerns. It's something that you sort of, it's a very guilt-driven thing, especially from the culture that I come from. Uh,
Shame,
yeah,
shame. I hate myself. This is awful. How could I do this? What's wrong with me? I must be a bad person. Those kinds of feelings are endemic over time to addiction. Um, So there are many, many resources. They often cost money. And I really am, please forgive me, going to point to the work that I do. I have done this work for 30 years. And what I understand is that many people are too ashamed to go to a support group. They maybe don't have the resources to go to therapy. There are no treatment centers in India for this issue. I've created a website where we have 14 groups that are free for spouses who've been cheated on, for spouses who have children who've been cheated on, for spouses who are older who've been cheated on. There are groups for men who are sexually addicted. There are groups for men who might be losing their relationship who are sexually addicted. There are groups for young porn addicts. So I've created an environment where everything is free. And that's really important to me, as I said, because there are many people who may not be able to access that. And in addition to our website, we do residential treatment. We do have a treatment center. I do take people for a month at a time, like with drugs and alcohol, and work on these issues. And that is also there. So our website is www, I hate saying that part. It's seeking integrity, seeking to look for integrity, a sense you want about yourself. So seekingintegrity.com. And on Seeking Integrity, you will find all the free resources. You'll also find links to the 12-step programs, to books to read, to what spouses need to look at. And
So
we also teach courses online. So there's
yeah,
a lot of resources there.
I just want you to give me a slight brief on the 12-step program.
And when you say brief, I
I
need a little
mean,
bit
you
more
can
information. Do
take
you
a
mean
couple
just,
of, yeah, a couple of minutes to just explain to us,
right?
because I think we've heard a lot of programs
Mm-hmm,
in terms of substance abuse, of alcohol, drug addiction,
right.
but I think we haven't heard much on the porn or sexual compulsive behavior.
I bet you that if you were to do a lot of research, that there are support groups for sex and porn addicts in India. You would not know about them because the 12-step programs are anonymous. So I leave my house in the evening and I go to a group and I come home. You would never know what I went for.
Yeah.
The anonymous part is about the shame and the embarrassment. And I don't want to see people, I don't want anyone to see me going in and out. It interests me, though, that the person who will go to a sex worker and doesn't have any embarrassment about that will not want to go to a support group because they're embarrassed. I think that amuses me. Anyway, the 12-step programs they provide two things. One is a set of structure for how I might live differently, having to do with honesty, having to do with a spiritual life, having to do with practicing connection and integrity and living. It's almost like a guide to life. And life is not about dishonesty, lying to myself, cheating, keeping secrets. But for addicts, it's endemic. And so for addicts to have a literal path that is written, and they can go to a group where they're discussing this. And I think that is the other. So there's a structure about how to get well. The other thing that 12-step programs offer is the social piece. So I can everyone in the room has my problem. If you
Yeah.
go to an alcoholism meeting, everyone's an alcoholic. If you go to a porn addiction meeting, and that comfort in being with people who won't judge me, who understand me, who have the same problem as I do. Plus, there are people in those meetings who are doing a little better than me. And I can say, oh, I want your support because I can see you would be a good role model. There's someone who'll come up to me and say, you know, you're doing better than me. Can you help me? So there's a spirit of emotional support. There is a spirit of comfort. We're not going to be ashamed or embarrassed. And it's anonymous and it's free. So the 12-step programs in every culture are in areas of problematic addiction. There are alcoholic meetings, there are drug addict
Yeah.
meetings, there are gambling addict meetings, and there are sex addiction meetings. You can go online and look for 12-step meeting, sexual addiction, 12-step meeting, porn addiction, and you will find the groups are Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Porn Addicts Anonymous. So you will find these free groups. And the good news for us is there's online. I don't have to go to some place and sit in a room with a bunch of strangers. I can now engage in these interactions online.
So my last question is, like we spoke about, as a culture, as a society, while we do have sex addiction education programs, sorry, in schools at a very young age, uh, you know,
Good.
do we then include porn addiction? We know that children are having puberty much earlier.
Yes.
Do you think these conversations need to be had, at a parental level? Do mentors and teachers need to bring these things up?
Well, the question starts with, is a parent willing to talk about sex at all with their child? I think you have to start there. Are we educated? Because many therapists in my culture are not educated to talk about sexuality. So at a personal and professional level, we need to have more cultural permission to talk about this. I have a friend whose 11-year-old was found to be looking at porn. And he came to me and he was horrified. There are books about how to talk to your 5-year-old about inappropriate images. There are books for parents who have a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old. So there is material written that explains in an age-appropriate way how you talk about these images. And if you think about it, helping a child understand where there might be problems is much better than them just finding them and not knowing what to do. So I want my child informed, just like I might say, don't take candy from a stranger. Don't get in a car with a stranger. I might say there are certain things that people will look at that aren't good for you. I would monitor. I would put my children's computers on a filter. So I made sure that they didn't have access to this. But yes, I think education is ultimately the answer. You're not going to stop pornography. You're not going to stop alcohol. You're not going to take these pleasurable experiences away, but you can teach people at this level, there can be problems, and this is what the problem looks like. And awareness is the key to change.
My last question is, like we
You
said,
said the last question was your
yeah.
last question. So I'm going to say your extra last
Yes.
question.
So we've spoken about a lot of men and pornography. So is there a fundamental, difference between the two genders when we're looking at sex addiction and pornography specifically?
Well, as I said, first of all, there's not much more shame. So if you have a man who's having a lot of sex, in my culture, we call him all kinds of, you go, good God job, stud. If a woman is having a lot of sex, we don't use those supportive, we use words, like slut. We use words that, so women inherently are looked at differently. So it's much, much harder for a woman to come forward and talk about this because she knows how the culture will look at her, and she has that sense inside of herself of what it means to her based on the culture. So the percentage of women is not as large. Women tend to get exposed in a different way. So they may be looking at porn because they want to see, is their body the way someone might desire? Are their breasts large enough? Is this what a woman is supposed to look like? And they look to porn to inform them. Then they may become engaged in the pornography on a regular basis. The men are looking for different reasons. Women get hooked into it, but they may not necessarily go there because they want frequent stimulation and they want to see new images. But they do get caught up in the pleasure, the intensity, the distraction if they have similar issues.
Okay. So that's about it. Thank you so much for being with us.
May I ask you one question? I'm sorry, I'm going to add to this
Yeah.
for you. There are books, and perhaps people would like to read. There is the podcast. If you want to mention those, perhaps people might find those resources. Is
Yeah,
that
I think
okay?
I think that's what we're going to do. We on our YouTube channel, as we upload the video, we will have all your resource
I see.
material and the links to your website. So I'm
And
just
others too. I really encourage you to have a link to the 12-step programs. I really encourage you, even if someone cannot